This is a Film Stories original podcast.
We made this.
Welcome everyone to the XCast. The truth is in here. I'm your host, Sarah Blair, and welcome back to I Want to Believe Minute, where we examine the second X-Files movie 1 minute at a time. Today, helping me explore minute 52, which runs from approximately 51 on the dot as Scully sighs heavily through 51 minutes 59 seconds as Scully says to call the Richmond DA. Is regular XCast guest, JJ Lendl. Welcome back, JJ.
Hello, it's been a while.
It has indeed.
Been a whole minute.
I like your new sweatshirt.
Thank you.
Looking good.
It's definitely not the same sweatshirt turned inside out.
No. I would never have been able to guess that at all.
Yes. No. And I love what you've done. I mean,
do you like my hair?
It's beautiful. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
You've got it up in a classic 60s beehive. Which no one can verify, which is fine. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, I put a lot of work into this, and nobody's gonna see it.
Yes,
except for you.
I can't wait to see what you do for the next minute.
Oh, just wait! I've got some surprises.
Because there's a lot of pressure for you to change it up.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like the Oscar party night. Every party you got to wear a different outfit.
It's true. We're just this is the Oscar party of the XCast.
Yes.
I Want to Believe Minute. Here we are. So, okay, we're back with the next minute. We've got Mulder and Scully having this very important conversation. And we were talking a little bit in the last episode about Scully's motivation for what she's got going on. And because to sum it up briefly, Scully has her career as a medical doctor. Like, she's actually doing medical doctor things now.
Yes, not just autopsies.
Whereas when she was a medical doctor in the FBI, she was, working on dead people, which was fine and very helpful, very useful. But now she's working to save lives instead of, help the victims find, their justice. So it's different. And she's finally doing what she was trained to do, we think. I don't know that she necessarily ever trained as a surgeon.
No.
She was a surgical medical doctor, but...
Yeah, I think she's very much doing something she's not trained to do.
Right. Which I think is a very important point to note.
Everyone seems fine. Those felt like thousands of doctors in the room with her. Mm-hmm. But I guess she was the most qualified.
Yeah. Entrust this child's life to neurosurgeon Scully.
Amazing. Yes.
So, but her motivation is that she doesn't want to get pulled back into the FBI and Mulder's quest for the truth, whatever that may be at this point. Is it really clear? I don't know.
Yeah, and this minute that we're about to talk about doesn't quite get into that. She's sort of hemming and hawing about it, almost in hopes that Mulder is going to drop it on his own, as if she has never spoken to this person before in her life. As if Fox Mulder is just going to walk away from literally anything that he's ever done, which I find very interesting. I like that you mentioned that this minute started with a very pregnant pause and sigh on part of Scully. And if I can talk about blocking a little bit here, there's a bit of a transition at the very beginning of this minute too. So I feel like this is a nice break. In the previous minute, you've got Mulder and Scully sort of sitting together in this, post-op doctor's locker room is what I'll call it, with the fun little diabetes poster behind them and a little shower in the back. And There's a lot of two shots in the last minute of Mulder and Scully in the frame together. And at the very start of this minute, after Mulder has asked, what changed your mind in terms of doing the procedure on the child, you got this big sigh, and she crosses across the room. And you start to physically see this barrier, which is now going to be represented in the dialogue. And so, I always find blocking very interesting. And as someone who did a lot of acting in school, and then for a couple of years out of school, I always find it interesting to see how actors will try and match sort of the mood of the conversation with the physicality and the distance. And so I thought that was a really good indicator of where the conversation was going to go, at least from Scully's perspective.
Mm-hmm.
So throughout the minute, you've got, at the very beginning of this minute, Scully crosses the room towards the shower. And of course, all I thought of when I saw the shower behind her is like, I wonder if they ever thought about doing one of those cut shots right after the surgery of Scully, in the shower, and just sort of what you've got some info on that,
I
Sarah?
do. I think it's the next minute, but I think it's fair to talk about it now since you brought it up. Frank actually said that they did have a scene planned of Scully in the shower, but they had to cut it because of time. Like, they never filmed it, but they had planned to do a Scully shower scene. So you're not wrong about that.
All right, okay. I feel very validated there.
Mm-hmm.
Less of a creep. It just felt like, because that's pretty typical, and to have more of a transition between, within that 50th or 51st minute, between the surgical scene and then this post-op scene. But when she gets over to that side of the room, there is this sort of shift in tone because, and prior to that, we're talking about, okay, this is what's going on with Scully, and then Scully sort of realizes, okay, you're not here to talk about my plot in this movie, Mr. Mulder. We're here to talk about the main plot here, aren't we, sir? And then you've got Mulder, as he's sort of making his case, slowly moving toward her throughout the entire minute that we're discussing, until finally they're face to face, and the minute ends with him saying, I need you on this with me. And I think that we talked about this in the last minute, just with sort of like general thoughts about the movie. I think that this is where the movie really shines in a lot of ways, is the performances of, Duchovny and Anderson, and these quieter scenes. And I've got issues with some of these scenes as well, but in terms of the performances, I think that they do a really good job of making these moments land. And I think this is a really good example of that.
Yeah, I agree. And it was interesting because Chris Carter and Frank Spotnitz on the commentary, Chris mentioned that they'd always resisted doing scenes that he called domestication, like domesticating on the show. And this is a very coupley, having an argument. It's going to like cause a rift.
Yes.
It's very domestic. And we don't get to see Mulder and Scully like this.
Yeah,
we
absolutely.
get to see it in the show, and it's a departure from what we've seen between them before. So, what are your thoughts on having a type of scene like this between them, and like getting really into that nitty gritty relationship stuff between them, and how Scully has moved on from the FBI and is causing problems?
Yeah, it's interesting to think about it as like a domestic scene. I know I often have arguments with my wife about, I'm like, I've got to save these kidnapped women, and she's like, I really got to focus on this brain surgery. Just typical husband and wife stuff, partner stuff. It's so funny because the stakes are so high with both of these storylines, and I think these scenes exist in the series, but they are from a different vantage point. In fact,
I feel like in this particular minute, you could see this conversation play out very typically in an episode of the X-Files prior to the agents getting together, whether on screen or off screen, and simply discussing the merits of continuing with a case based upon the information at hand. And so that plays very X-Files-y to me. I feel like the next minute of film is where it really does transition into foreign territory when it comes to this relationship on film, because they start, getting into the idea that we are not agents and we are not working this case. This is different. This is a different life now. And I won't get too into that since that's not the minute that we are discussing, but I do think that, relationships evolve. And, I'll use the term verisimilitude in that, the movie should take itself seriously and should take the characters seriously. And I feel like in that sense, it takes these characters very seriously, in that it's been 6 years since we've seen them last. And of course, people's feelings, people's relationships are going to evolve. And when you love someone and you openly love them, the stakes are a lot higher than having an argument with your, colleague, regardless of how close you are, because you're opening yourself up more. And so, I almost feel like this is a really interesting scene for longtime fans, because it starts from this place that we've been, where it's like, Scully, we got to do this at Mulder, da 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 da, and then just verges into this other territory that we've never been before. So it's really interesting from that standpoint to see.
It's juicy.
It's juicy, right? Sweet, yes.
Juicy.
Maybe juicy
emotional
yes.
damage happening.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think it's, like you said, we get Mulder starting off. It is almost a little bit reminiscent of Bad Blood a little bit, where he's like, it's the Mulder version of the tale, and he's like, but I just want to work on this case with you, Scully. And he's you can tell how very cautiously he is treading at the beginning of this in that train.
Yes.
Because he comes in and he sits down. He's like, so how are you? And it's like,
wow,
knows
that's crazy.
I'm going to have to ask this of Scully, and she's not going to be happy about it. And, just to see how well they play that dynamic out, it's really fascinating to see on screen.
Yeah.
Because as far as we understand it, they've been living this life together, free of the FBI, free of the cases. Mulder's just living his best conspiracy recluse life. And Scully's working as a medical doctor, and she's, helping patients. And they're living in this house together and being very domestic. And, it's fascinating to think of them being that way for so long. And then they get to hear,
Yes.
So
yeah,
and it's all coming back, and all these past traumas are coming back for both of them.
Right. And it's interesting that you put it that way, like living your best, and I feel like this is where, and I'm kind of really looking forward to minute 53, because I feel like this is the appetizer for the entree when it comes to the scene, because there's a lot of building in this. We're sort of setting up what the conflict is going to be, and sort of what the conflict of the film ends up being for these two. If this was a romantic comedy, this scene would be where the two characters come apart, only to come together later. And when we find Mulder at the beginning of the film, I mean, he does not seem like he's living his best life. And and of course, it doesn't seem like Scully feels like he's living his best life either. And so, this moment, and the moment that's about to happen, in a lot of ways feels like an about face for Scully in the film. And, I mentioned in the last episode that I watched this with my wife, and I think the scene was a bit of a head scratcher for her in trying to track Scully's motivation in this scene and over the course of the film. And I think that she has a point. Like, I think that there is, obviously it's a very complicated situation, but I'm not sure if the film does a great job of tracking her in the opening scenes to her in this scene in terms of the clear change in motivation, or maybe focusing of motivation. Because her big refrain, here is, you've done what was asked of you. You've helped them this far, and so what else, do they want from you? And of course, they get into this more in the next minute. But yeah, I would say, I don't know. I think that there is the motivation for Scully in this scene feels a little hinky compared to what has happened in the movie before. But there's a lot of elements at play for her.
That's true. And, there's got to be a lot of conflicting feelings going on inside of her. Like, maybe she doesn't even know, like, what her motivation is just yet. She just knows that she's built this career finally, as she's moved on from the FBI, which is what she wanted in the beginning. She wanted to be an FBI agent. She wanted to make a name for herself. She wanted to do all these things, and she got pulled into Mulder's orbit and, got caught up in that. So she was always related back to him. But now this is her chance to stand on her own as a medical doctor.
Right.
And
in a hospital that she clearly hates, but
with people who clearly are up against her every
right, exactly, yeah.
But but this is her, her chance to kind of like feel like she's doing something helpful for this kid and these patients that she has, and so I'm sure that at the same time, she's probably thinking, well, finally, Mulder and I get to go back and solve cases again, because she seems really enthusiastic about it, because it probably is kind of exciting to get back to that and how they originally were together. But at the same time, now that it's becoming a little too real and he's getting sucked in a little too much, she probably feels like she's getting pulled back. And doesn't it's a lot. It's a lot going on, and this is 1 minute.
Right. Yes. Right.
Like
we see her,
so
she's
much.
Sort of retracting, and in the next minute is where she sort of launches her initial, artillery assault here, where she actually starts saying some of the things that are just kind of hinted at with body language in this of the scene.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I think that is actually a good place to move on to the next minute, don't you think?
Yeah, I'm chomping at the bit to talk about this next bit of
I know. There's a lot of meat in this coming up. All right.
A lot of meat on this bone.
Totally. All right, we're going to talk about it tomorrow. But until then, always remember, trust no one.